Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on onboarding Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. My name is Tyson Fewens. I'm a customer onboarding architect with the customer success organization within Veeam. And joining me today is Jason Trier. He's a senior customer onboarding engineer. We're going to walk through kind of high level from the start and through several scenarios of Veeam Recovery Orchestrator, and just try to kind of set you up for the best possible outcomes from the start. So to get things kicked off, I'm going to go ahead and share my my screen. Oops. And here we go. All right. So Veeam Recovery Orchestrator is part of our Veeam data platform. You can see here that we have the breakdown of the different levels of licensing for Veeam data platform. Starting with our lowest level foundation, that's just Veeam backup and recovery, backup and replication. And then with advanced, we add Veeam 1. And then what we're talking about today is Veeam Recovery Orchestrator, which is part of the Veeam Data Platform Premium offering. So just to give you an idea of that, what your licensing should look like, it should be Veeam Data Platform Premium. A little bit about the use case, why we recommend Recovery Orchestrator here is that it gives you kind of a higher level of automation and management on top of just having VBR and Veeam 1. It allows us to automate tests to really test not just the recovery of workloads, but the recovery of workloads based on different DR scenarios. So we can automate those and run through those playbooks just to verify that your DR plans are going to work through. Part of that is that there's documentation with every step. So as you launch, your recovery plans, or we launch them in test, the execution will be fully documented. This will document step by step. So as you build your recovery plans, this can also be considered part of your, playbook documentation. And also this allows us to, because we've kind of, pre-populated these plans with every step from the start to finish, it allows us to recover faster from disasters. This kind of concept of one-click recovery, because you've already tested and set everything out. So when it comes to an actual failover, it's a very quick automated process. So there's several different recovery scenarios that are built in with Recovery Orchestrator. A lot of these can be supplemented with individual workload steps and everything, but everything from VM backups to VM replication. So if we have vSphere to vSphere replication going on, continuous data protection replicas. So if you're doing CDP from like production to DR, we can also automate those. There are storage platforms that can be automated as well. So if we're doing storage replication, we can recover through those, and then also agent backups. The main components, and we'll kind of break this down, and later on Jason will demo a little further, but the installed components that come with Recovery Orchestrator is the actual orchestration service, and that this is accessed through a web UI, so it'll install a web platform that you'll use to manage it. But along with that, we do actually install Veeam Backup and Replication, an embedded version, and then also Veeam 1. So it's the complete package of the platform is installed alongside of Recovery Orchestrator, and that's because we use pieces and core functionality from those two to create our recovery plans and to inventory all the services. Also, we have a SQL database that will manage the database for Recovery Orchestrator. So by default, all of these things are deployed on the Orchestrator server. Just like VBR and Veeam we can do distributed deployments of this. So you don't have to use the embedded versions. Just to mention that if you have your production Veeam backup and replication server, we can add that in, and it'll be tracked through agents, as well as Veeam if you have another Veeam server. This is kind of high level, and I will say that for most use cases, the first sizing option is good and will fit most. So the 1 to 1500 protected systems. But this does give you an idea of scalability. If you have a very large environment, we can scale this server up to match what we need. Part of this, and there is a link on here for the Veeam database, because as we grow these workloads, there is some additional sizing consideration to take in for that as well. Because in this, with Recovery Orchestrator, because we install VBR and Veeam the embedded versions, there will be database usage for all three functions. So within the SQL database, we'll have databases for Recovery Orchestrator, Veeam and VBR. And so the sizing will be using all three. So we're going to talk a little bit high level of the best practice recommendations for Recovery Orchestrator. The tool is really created to be that failover for true DR. So the general best practice is that Recovery Orchestrator should be at your DR site. This is so that we can automate even during like full production outage. So say your production site A goes down, the Recovery Orchestrator would be at your DR or site B, and we'd still have all those recovery plans, recovery locations, all of the configuration is there so that we can truly have that one-click restore. So this is just high level, just to kind of show that we do want to create some kind of separation so that our recovery plans and everything is able to launch in the case that we lose production. Kind of continuing from that concept, we do have customers that have deployed in the cloud, kind of as like a third site or like a management kind of overlay, so that we can have management running in a cloud location that connects to maybe our physical production or DR sites to manage the whole interchange of data. So that is definitely an option because of durability and scalability and all the great things that hyperscale provides. That's a very secure option. But obviously there's costs with that for running servers and stuff. So keep that in mind, as you can see the note here. Today, Veeam Recovery Orchestrator does only support VMware workloads and recovery into Azure. That's for the platforms. So like we covered, it does support a couple platforms for storage, replication. It does support agents. So agents anywhere, as long as you're running Veeam agent, for Windows or Linux, and so on, whether those are in the cloud or on-prem, any of those workloads can be recovered. But pure hypervisor platform would just be VMware at this time. And then, like I said, we natively support recovery into Azure with more to come. So to kind of break down how there's really two main components on how Recovery Orchestrator works. Once we have all the infrastructure in place, and we'll talk through a little bit more of that, really there's kind of two sides to a recovery plan or creating that DR recovery. And the first one is on the left. There's the actual plan to where we break down what is the source of what we're recovering, down to what are the steps that we're going to do, what kind of failover or retries, or what are we going to scan these backups during recovery. All those types of options are available as part of the recovery plan. So that's more of the actual step by step of what we're doing. And then it kind of just like backup and replication, where you have your source and then you have your target. Recovery plan is like really defining the source. Recovery locations is defining the target. So where are we going to recover these items to? So we define all the steps, but then we have to define where this will reside. So whether this is recovery into an Azure environment or recovery, into your DR vCenter and so on. And there is a note here that recovery locations are not required for replication failover, and that's because when we create replication plans, by default, like all that's built into the actual replication. So a replica already has its target location, so the target location would just be the replicated VM. I'm going to talk through just a couple of high level, like the main recovery scenarios, and then we're going to get into a demo here soon with Jason, and then he's going to cover some of the more advanced scenarios after the fact. But really, at the simplest, Recovery Orchestrator is built to recover either from replication or backup. In a simple form, this would be from production to DR. So whether this is a backup copy or a replicated VM. In this diagram, this is a replicated VM. So for example, we're showing that we're taking a production VM, we're going to run a replication job to create kind of a standby replica of the VM. And because all of the recovery orchestrator components exist in the DR site, say we lose production, we can easily fail over to that VM as part of our recovery plan. The second most common is, like I said, orchestrating from backups. So say we have, this again is showing that we have, all of our management data sitting over in DR. We're managing backups at the production site, and say we want to recover, maybe it's just a subset of workloads. It also shows agents. So we have, VMs and agent jobs over in production. We're backing up into a repository. We can also automate the recovery of those workloads into DR, as it shows here that we can, say recover those VMs from backup into ESXi or vCenter. And then, the agent workloads could also be recovered directly to that DR infrastructure. So from that, I'm going to hand it over to Jason to give us a little demo through, and then we'll come back to the slides after that to talk through those more advanced scenarios.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tyson. Let me go ahead and get into the demo here. All right, so we're in the demo lab taking a look at the Veeam Recovery Orchestrator server. So as Tyson pointed out here, this is a Windows server, likely hopefully at your DR site is going to be the best location for this server. You could see on the left-hand side, as he had mentioned, that we've got Veeam Backup and Replication as an embedded component that's going to be installed on this. Note that you don't need to utilize this Veeam Backup and Replication server to create your jobs and policies. We will connect to a separate Veeam Backup and Replication server that you may have already in production, already existing, protecting your current environment. But note that this could be leveraged in the event that you do want to utilize it. We also have Veeam 1. It's going to be a lightweight version of Veeam 1 that is installed on Veeam Recovery Orchestrator as well. And then Veeam Recovery Orchestrator itself. So that's going to be the three main components sitting on this Veeam Recovery Orchestrator server. Note, I'm actually going to be connected to the VBR server here, and with the connectivity to Veeam Recovery Orchestrator, I can hit the Veeam Recovery Orchestrator main page, right? Essentially the main management page for Orchestrator. So taking a look, this is when you log in. When you do your first installation of the Veeam Recovery Orchestrator, you're going to do the initial configuration. So you're going to connect to your virtual infrastructure. That's going to be your vCenter. You're going to be connecting into your Veeam Backup and Replication infrastructure as well, potentially Enterprise Manager if you have that, and then any storage. If you're using HPE or NetApp, you can do storage connectivities as well there. But once you do that initial configuration, you'll land on this page here. So what we're taking a look at is we're taking a look at the dashboard. This dashboard has, just high level information about your how you've configured Recovery Orchestrator for your environment, um, plan execution, readiness checks. We'll get into some of these things a little bit later on. Data Labs is a functionality, a part of Veeam Recovery Orchestrator as well. That's going to be isolated testing for the recovery plans that you've created in Recovery Orchestrator, taking those virtual machines that you've grouped into an inventory and bringing those into a isolated network where we can do some testing against that. Now on the left-hand side, as we go over, you'll see inventory. Inventory is going to be a collection of your virtual infrastructure as well as what we see in the Veeam backup and replication environment. So you're going to see replication jobs in here. You're going to see policies, backup policies. You're also going to see VMware tags. VMware tags are one recommended way that it is a recommended way that we group VMs for recovery plans. You could do that in different ways. You could have it by backup job. You could have it by the replication job itself. If you wanted to have interdependent or like VMs, you want to say 5, 10 VMs in a particular job or replication, you can do that way to group a recovery plan, or you can use a VMware tag if your workloads are spread amongst multiple different protection policies. So that is one recommended way to go. You could also group by data store, VMware inventory folders. So there's different ways to do that. Taking a look at the recovery plans, we've got a few different recovery plans here today. These are already pre-configured. We're doing a lot of different recovery here. You'll see at the top, this accounting application is actually a replica plan. So we are doing replication jobs, and we're creating a recovery plan called a replica plan to basically inventory group and then orchestrate the recovery of those machines. Now you see a lot of other, we've got some physical file servers, we've got web and dev servers that we're looking at here. You'll notice on this right-hand side as we start to go over, what the current state is, if it's verified and passed any, isolation tests that we've done against it. Maybe needs some verification on doing a latest readiness check. So we talk about what those different checks are here. The readiness check is an initial check that runs every couple hours that's going to validate whether, hey, is your plan good to go? Is it, is the underlying virtual machines that you have in that plan or physical machines that we're protecting, are they meeting their RPO? Are they have the proper retention points for recovery? So those are some of the things we're checking. We're also checking to make sure that we've got enough storage on the target side. In this particular scenario, if we're doing replication, the data is already sitting on the data stores, right? We're creating a replication job and being backup and replication, and the data is already sitting there. So we're orchestrating powering on those VMs and getting them onto the right network and re-IPing them in this particular accounting application. But as we go down, we've got some other recovery plans here. You'll see a recovery location. That was what Tyson had mentioned, a recovery location essentially being a logical inventory grouping of compute servers or like ESXi hosts, cluster or data center level, as well as storage. So which data stores are we going to recover these web servers? Now these web servers are actually is it simply just a backup job? So now we're saying, hey, we've got a backup job. Maybe we have got a backup copy of these web servers, and we want to bring these servers back from the repository at Site 2. Now, where's the recovery location? Where are we going to be placing these workloads in the virtual infrastructure? So that's where that recovery location comes into play. On this left-hand side, we've got data labs. I've mentioned this a little bit. This is going to be how we do some of our isolated testing within Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. And then we can extend data labs into lab calendars. So lab calendars is essentially taking a pre-existing recovery plan, saying, I want to run a data lab against those recovery plans, and I want to schedule them. So this critical apps is scheduled essentially a couple days a week. 2 a.m. It's going to power on that particular lab in that isolated environment. It's going to be completely disassociated from production, so it's not going to have any effect on your production network and the production VMs, but will give you the capability to either go into your vCenter here. You can come down and you can actually say, hey, we've got site one, we've got maybe these accounting VMs, but maybe these accounting VMs come up on site two, but they're going to come up into an isolated network. Then you can console into those and go ahead and validate those virtual machines in that isolated network. Going up to the upper right-hand side, we have the administration. So in administration, this is where we're going to do turning all the twists and knobs for Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. So taking a look, we've got Veeam Threat Center that is now built in as of version 12 and of Veeam Backup Replication, as well as version 7 of Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. The Threat Center is going to be just a holistic overview of your current security status of the environment. So that's just integrated here as well. We also have orchestrator agents. So these orchestrator agents are going to be the way that we communicate with Veeam Backup and Replication, VBR being our production Veeam Backup and Replication server. We're going to essentially authenticate an agent to that box, and we are going to essentially, that's where all of our encrypted communication is happening. So Veeam Recovery Orchestrator is essentially an overlay on top of VBR. That's where VBR has all the knowledge of the policies and where the data is sitting on those repositories. The orchestrator is simply going to say, hey, I need to send these commands to access this particular data. I need you to recover it in site 2 or site 1, whatever that might be. And then also Veeam Recovery Orchestrator itself. Taking a look at VMware, this is going to be a connection to vCenter. When we run particular data labs or recovery plans, we're actually going to be, potentially having to send calls to vCenter, for things for specific API tasks that we're looking to do with the product. I had mentioned storage, and Tyson mentioned storage connectivity. So that is another feature of the product. So we could essentially leverage the essentially replication and orchestration of recovering LUNs from a production SAN to a DR SAN. And so that's something we can leverage in the product. Again, that's only going to be with HP and NetApp as of today. As we start drilling down here on this left-hand side, we're going to get this recovery locations. So we've talked a lot about recovery locations. Again, we just reiterate that recovery locations and recovery plans are really the two major configurational components to get your environment orchestrated. So if we take a look at site 2 here, I'm going to go ahead and click continue. It just shows you all of the recovery plans that are associated here. So we're going to have different recovery options within this recovery plan. So we can recover agents, we can recover VM backups as well with this particular recovery plan. You'll also notice that there is, enable instant VM recovery. This is completely grayed out if agents is selected. You can choose to modify that. If you're deselecting agents, it's a requirement for agents. We highly recommend leaving this on. For those that are not familiar with instant VM recovery, that's essentially our technology to take a backup or a backup copy. We actually rehydrate the data of that retention or that restore point that you're looking for. We bring that VMDK back online on the repository itself, and we do a VNFS connection to the ESXi host that we want to essentially place that front end, the VMX file. We want to say, hey, I want to connect VM01 to this ESXi host, but we want to be able to run it off this repository. So that's the kind of our instant VM recovery technology. And it is used widely across the board within Recovery Orchestrator for many tasks that you're looking to do. Data Labs uses it. So there's going to be, so it's really a requirement, and I would recommend leaving it on. So this is where we take a look at the compute resources that I mentioned. We're potentially doing a in this instance, we're actually doing a backup copy of a particular VM, VM01. It's landing at a production site repository. We're doing a backup copy of that at the DR repository. And now we want to be able to recover that VM into that DR site, or in this instance, site 2. And you'll see that compute resource that I mentioned. We're actually looking at one specific host, site 2, is where we're going to do that recovery. Storage is very similar. We're selecting a singular data store at this location. You may have multiple data stores that you want to recover to. And during a readiness check for recovery plan, that we are doing a backup or backup copy, essentially a restore recovery plan is what that is called. It's going to check to see whether you have enough available space, enough available compute to bring those workloads back online. Best practice, you can set this to 80%, you can set it to 85%. Just know that obviously always you want to have some kind of headroom on your data stores. There's other tasks that are running on your data stores, so you don't want to overfill those particular data stores. So just make sure that you kind of keep that in mind. Now, this particular checkbox is extremely important for knowing where we're restoring the data. So if we're going to be doing a backup copy restoration at your DR site or your target site where we're sending that data, you're going to want to make sure that this backup copy is selected. This checkbox is selected. So there looks like we've got agent networks configured here. They're saying I want to take everything from every subnet where that agent currently exists or where that physical machine exists. So you could have a specific subnet, and we're going to take that, and when we bring it back and we orchestrate that physical workload back into the virtual environment or the restoration of that machine, this is where we're going to place it. We're going to place it in this destination vCenter that manages this data center and this particular network. This is going to be the same thing for VM networks. So we're actually saying, what was for instance, VM01 was sitting on VM network in this particular site. So site 1, that machine sitting there, it's actually got this particular, what we'd call network or port group in VMware terminology. Where is that sitting? What in production? And so when we go to the target site, we need to be able to say, okay, hey, this was originally sitting on this network. We want to bring it back up on this network at site 2. Now, the port group is an absolute requirement regardless of whether you have, say, stretch layer 2 between the sites, because this mapping is specific to bringing the machine up. And when we make the calls into VMware, it's going to say, I need to know the specific port groups I'm going to. So this is an absolute requirement. This is a requirement. The actual re-IP isn't going to be a requirement itself. In this lab, it's completely flat. So site 1 and site 2 are both on 10.0.0 network. If you've got different subnets between the sites and you're bringing machines back, there's potentially you're going to need some re-IP rules there. From the field, we've got other customers that also maybe move their layer 3, right? So they can move their layer 3 from site 1 to site 2 with SD-WAN or something to that effect, and then they don't have to do any re-IP. So that's another consideration. Data sovereignty. This is just data sovereignty rules in the event that you have specific compliance and boundaries for where the data should be. If you don't have this, don't worry about it. So that's kind of a recovery plan as a whole there. Taking a look at data labs a little bit more. We'll actually come back to this one in a very kind of high-level configurable items here in Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. When you get in, most often you're only going to have a few system administrators in your Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. I generally, the default scope essentially is going to be all access to everything in Recovery Orchestrator. You can add additional scopes if you want to do RBAC and have specific control over permissions for users. That's going to be solely a business consideration. Roles makes an extension to that. We can add accounts. We can add, in this particular particular instance, the Veeam Recovery Orchestrator server is on the domain. Um, Best practices for Veeam is that you can put this on the domain, but it's recommended that you would be in a work group or a management domain if you have that. And that's also applies to all other Veeam components, VBR, your proxies, repositories, etc. Inventory, this is just going to give you a total inventory of everything we're connecting to, what recovery locations we have. We'll get into some plan steps here and some of these other functionalities with Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. Taking a look at plan steps, these are going to be predefined steps that we use in recovery plans. So when we have a recovery plan, when we configure a recovery plan, rather, we're going to add plan steps to that particular plan. And so, we're going to have to register VMs. We're going to have to restore them if it's a, recovery plan, a restore plan to bring back backups or bring back VMs from backups, right? So you may want to also additionally do ping a VM network or check the heartbeat, make sure your VMware tools are good. If it's a specific application, you can come down and do Exchange, or if it's a DC, you can do DNS, etc. You can set, starting of specific services, but you could also do PowerShell scripting, vPower CLI, and create your own custom scripts and add them to here. You'll notice that with each particular plan, there are step parameters. Now, when you script this and you bring this your custom script in here, you'll actually be able to make edits to your custom script, and they'll show up as parameters in here in the plan step. And I think it is important to point out that with Veeam Recovery Orchestrator, not native to the product, we are unable to do a re-IP of Linux VMs. So that's going to be a custom script. Tyson has created a script for that, and we can definitely share that here in the chat. Now, I want to take a second just to remind everybody, we went over a lot of content. If anybody has any questions about what we've kind of gone through so far, feel free to throw those questions in the chat. Credentials, you can apply specific credentials here to the credential manager. If you're connecting to VBR, these will actually pull over from Veeam Backup and Replication as well. Yara rules, this is latest of version 12 of Veeam Backup and Replication. We support an extension of Yara rules for malware scanning in data labs and isolated testing. So that's another feature here that you could add in to Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. Configuring SMTP. For those, we actually generate reports, as Tyson mentioned early on. So for those reports, we can actually get those mailed to you. We can set them up on a specific scheduled time. For instance, you may have that lab running, that lab calendar where you're running an isolated test at 2 a.m. in the morning. You want to know, was that successful? Those are the type of reports you can get back. Some additional tuning on settings, just overall licensing, initial configuration, you're going to set all of this up here. And just one other shout out here to logs. So whatever we're connected to, Veeam Backup Replication, we can actually dump all of the logs from everything we're connected to from Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. So that's going to be great if you're working with support. Now, so we've gone through quite a bit of information here. The one thing I want to take a look at here is okay. So this I went ahead and ran this plan before the demo here. It just shows that the current latest state is we did commit a failback to this. So this is this accounting application is a combination of essentially site 1. It's all of these accounting machines 1 through 5. If we take a look at the replication job in Veeam Backup and Replication here, you can see these VRO critical applications. That's going to be quite a few. We've got, not only our accounting, but we've got, DB and web and file in here. That's where I said those VMware tags are going to come in handy because we've actually grouped critical application. We've actually grouped accounting of those 5 machines within vCenter into those VMware tags, and we just utilize that as our grouping for this particular plan, right? Now we could come in here and say, I want to go ahead and run a live failover of this plan. Good. We can choose latest restore point, or maybe a different restore point that we have if we're doing multiple restore points with that replica. I think the other important thing to point out here too is going to be really calling out why we don't need a recovery plan again, and that's going to be we're at the replication job level itself. That's where we're setting these network mappings. We talked about in the recovery plan having to set network mappings, potentially having to select replica re-IP here. Looks like that. But you would set there'd be another box here for re-IP. If we're going to do a source and target re-IP, you're going to set your DNS servers, your gateways at that target location. We're going to set, again, these port groups for source and target networks. Additional job settings here. I think the other thing just to point out, general best practices, make sure you know where your source and target proxies are sitting for the transfer of that data. And this is currently failing over, so you'll see a few things happening. These accounting machines are starting to come up at that Site 2 location. If you look at Veeam Backup Replication, as I said, we're really just orchestrating on top of Veeam Backup Replication. So you're going to see that these are currently running in a failover status for these particular machines. What I'm going to do while we're waiting for that is I'm going to create a new plan just to show you the different plan types. So different plan types are going to be, and this is going to kind of go back to what Tyson was saying regards to what our recovery methods are. And so we can actually, as well as recovery, what's supported within the product. We've got VMware that we support. We also have Azure as well. Now, Azure is going to be specific to a target location. We can't take data, we can't orchestrate data and backups out of Azure today, but we can orchestrate, hey, we've taken a backup of a virtual machine or a physical machine, and we want to bring this to the cloud. We want to take it to Azure and put it in a subscription. That's all the thing. We can actually do that today. We can orchestrate or have a recovery plan for a CDP replica, that's continuous data protection. That's going to be our low RPO replica technology. And then we also have replica functionality, which is what we're testing right now. We've got storage. This is going to be whether, going with storage connectivity to the HPE or NetApp. And then restore. This is going to be where we're taking those backups from your repositories at your primary location or your target location. And I think this is important to point out that Orchestrator can be used for not only a complete site failure event, but it could be used for a cyber event as well. If you've got a production site, maybe you don't even have a DR site, you just have all of your data. Maybe you're backing up locally, you're going to object storage, you're scaling out with maybe a scale out backup repository, and you're still all the hardware is good, or maybe you have additional hardware at that primary site and you want to orchestrate bringing everything back in the event that you've been maliciously attacked. That's another great use case for the product. So we'll take a look. So you'll notice here, if I click restore, we get a recovery location here on the side. That's going to say, hey, I want to select a restore. I'm going to select a specific recovery location. For that instance, I said it may be a cyber event, you're going back to production. You could use a original VM location. If I go back to plan type, if we select replica, you'll see that recovery location goes away, rather. So inventory grouping, this is where I was talking about we can group from VMware tags, we can group from jobs, policies, data stores, etc. But let's say we want to take these accounting machines, we can add that VMware tag, and we can see that it has those 5 machines in there. Additional features around halting the plan if there's errors. How do you want to run VMs in sequence? You want to do them in parallel, in sequence. How many you want to do at any given time? Um, Note if we're a replica, Bootstorm is probably going to be a little bit easier, right? So you can probably do more simultaneous VMs on that target side or the primary side. But if we're doing a restore plan and we're selecting this, we might want to maybe not do as many particular VMs at any given time. So we had mentioned instant recovery. When we launch recovery plan for a restore plan, it's actually taking the data, it's doing a instant recovery of that machine, and then it's migrating it into the production environment. So, there's going to be a little bit more bottleneck. There's going to be a little bit more requirement of, moving data across the network and such there. So just be, cautious of that. These plan steps, as I mentioned, so we'll add in the plan steps that we need, maybe some custom plan steps. Once we configure this, we can actually go back and we can edit the parameters for this individual recovery plan if there's certain things that we're looking to do. A reprotect, we could actually configure a template job on Veeam Backup and Replication, and we can select that job to basically reprotect the data. You had a disaster, you went from source to a target site or DR site, and now you need to reprotect the data because that site's completely gone and you're not going back. So that's an absolute option here as well. This comes back to readiness check that I was talking about, that functionality that we have. This readiness check is going to validate your RTO. This is going to be for your failover, but it's also going to be for your data lab testing to validate that you've got 5 accounting machines. Can you bring them back up within an hour? Right. That's what that's testing. Recovery point objective. This is going to be validating your retention that you have within your particular jobs. Report templates. We've got a default template within Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. This template can be modified if you so choose. And then the reporting schedule, if you want to get those daily, you want to get those plan definition, that's an additional report, which just tells you this is everything about the plan. There's essentially, we've got things configured in this way. These particular VMs are part of this plan, that readiness check that I mentioned. And then the summary of that recovery plan that we're building here. So this one I hadn't finished. This is failed over at the site. Again, we're going to just take a look here at and seeing that these 5 accounting machines are up and available now. You'll notice here that the status is that they have failed over within Veeam Backup and Replication. And if we come back over to Recovery Orchestrator, we can see that it's in a failover state. We can actually launch, continue, and I'm just going to show you this quick. We can either do a failback or prepare for failback if that's something that we want to do at a given time. We can schedule it, or we want to do a permanent failover in the event that that site's completely down. Hey, we got to keep this data over here. So that's a permanent fail option that we get there. For this instance, I'm going to just fail it back with the original VM location. I'm going to use quick rollback because we didn't come back from a hardware failure. Restore those VM tags. And we're going to fail it back now. So one thing I want to point out here with data labs. Now, with data labs, it uses a fundamental component from Veeam Backup and Replication. If I come back here, we'll go to the backup infrastructure. We'll take a look at virtual labs, and we actually build a virtual lab in here. At a high level, virtual lab essentially is a Linux appliance that acts as a lab router, firewall between the production network and an isolated virtual switch, whether that's a standard switch or a distributed switch with these port groups. Essentially, there's going to be no uplinks for that isolated network. But it really sits on the fence between the two networks. We could take a look at the properties of this particular lab. We'll come in here. That's the lab name. We're sitting on site 2 host, so we're actually, this virtual lab is for testing backup copies at that second site. It's for testing replicas at that second site. You could have multiple virtual labs. You could have a virtual lab for site 1 if you wanted to do validation testing over there. Taking a look at the proxy, we've got, this is just configuration of the of the appliance itself, proxy appliance, Linux appliance. What's the name? What data store we're sitting on? What production network are we putting this particular VM on? It's just important to know that this particular appliance does need to be able to, you need to be able to reach this on a production network. Veeam backup and replication will send commands and functions and needs to communicate with this particular box. So taking a look at network, high level, advanced single host mode. This is, we've selected site 2 for this particular virtual lab. What this is calling out is we're going to use virtual standard switching. Only that switching is going to be on that particular host, site 2. So if we were to test that recovery plan, that accounting recovery plan that I had there, if we were to bring that back into this particular data lab or virtual lab association, it would go ahead and bring those back into that host only. It's only going to come back into that standard switch because that standard switch can't go across multiple hosts because there's no physical uplinks to that particular switch. Isolated networks, so we can do production mappings to these isolated network. This is going to be more specific to, hey, we've got VM01, it's sitting in site 2 VM network. I need to be able to bring it back into an isolated network. That isolated network is going to be in that virtual isolated switch that I had talked about on that site 2 host. And so when we bring that, when we make a call to bring up VM01 or accounting one, and we notice that its production network is originally sitting here, we're going to do essentially an intercept on that network to bring it over to this isolated network. And then network settings. So very high level, what this is going to entail is basically putting the IP address of the virtual NIC on the virtual lab sitting inside that isolated network. And we want to make this the gateway of that production site 2 network. That just basically means when I got accounting 1 coming back up in that isolated network, or accounting 1 through 5, they've got NIC settings already. They've already got their IPs that are sitting on 192.168.100. They're already looking for .2. So if I bring all those back, that means that they're going to be able to see that gateway. They're going to be able to communicate to each other, those 5 machines within that isolated network. So that's kind of a high-level overview of a virtual lab, going through it very quickly, and should come back through here. And the reason I bring that up, if we go back to administration in the upper right-hand side and we take a look at data labs, now this is where we're going to do, I mentioned that virtual lab to data lab association. So if we take a look at, we'll just go ahead and continue. We select a scope for this particular virtual lab data lab association. Essentially, this is taking that virtual lab we built in Veeam backup replication, and it's extending it into Recovery Orchestrator to utilize for essentially doing data lab testing against these particular recovery plans. So I'm going to go back out of the demo here, just back to the slides. All right, and we're going to go ahead and quickly go through these. Tyson already went through the restore from backups. That's going to be orchestrating recovery of those machines back at the same location. Backup copies to DR. We discussed this here in the demo. Discussed VNFS. We discussed having copies of that data at that DR location. Malware scanning can be done in line with what we call secure restore. I mentioned that we do an instant VM recovery, and then we basically migrate that to the DR host. Orchestrating from replicas, we've got the proxy servers there for the replication. The data is being placed, as you can see, on that DR side, and that's going to give us that capability to recover that there. Note that This is the only instance that Veeam Backup Replication, the production does not need to be online. It'll actually bring back the jobs into the local VBR on Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. Note that this does not apply to CDP. So we've got storage and VM failover. This is just a quick high-level look at that. Again, we're taking that data and replicating it natively with the SAN from a source to a target, and then we're just going to orchestrate on top of that. Restore to Microsoft Azure. So we mentioned that we can take data from a production environment. We can actually scale it out, potentially maybe to object storage. You can see that backup repository on the left side. We've got object stored on the right-hand side. Now we can do orchestration and recovery from the backup repository on production, or we can take it from object storage. Now, recommended placement is going to be that we have the data sitting in object storage in Azure. In that same subscription, the Azure proxy basically takes the data and it does a rehydration of it. It's going to do a conversion of the data to make it into a usable, Azure VM instance to place it out on your subscription. Backup verification. So this is going to get into the data labs portion. Not going to spend too much time on this here, but we will make these slides available to everybody so they can kind of get a more visual picture. Basically, what we're saying is for this particular environment is we can actually do verification of backups at the same location. So note that production side is on the left-hand side, but we're looking at the prod lab on the right-hand side. So it's actually the same ESXi host. You can see in the green on both sides at ESXi1, but ESXi02 on the data lab side. But we've got the same virtual switching between them. We've got the same port group that we're using. What we're basically doing is taking a virtual lab at that on that ESXi2 host, and we're giving it a VLab01, which is the name of the virtual lab. We're giving it an isolated virtual switch, an isolated port group. So when we take that, basically when we do a recovery plan, let's say I want to test this VM01, and I want to bring it into my data lab, it's going to bring it into that data lab on ESXi02, and it's going to bring it into that associated purple networking. So it's going to be completely isolated. Backup copy verification, very similar. The requirement for this backup copy verification for data labs is going to be that you have a recovery location that you're going to use during this operation. Again, we're just overlaying on top of the existing backup copy failover methodology here with your recovery plan. You say, I got these VMs at this location, I want to recover. And we're taking that recovery plan and we're then taking it into a data lab and testing it. So the main differentiator here is that the virtual lab's going to be sitting at the DR site like it was in our demo lab at that site too. And we're going to be then remapping essentially production networks at this particular instance, we're actually remapping production networks at the DR side to those isolated networks that we were building for that virtual lab. Replica verification. This is identical to the backup. Copy verification, you can actually use the same virtual lab that you're looking to use for backup copy. So you can utilize both of these, no problem, because it's essentially the same. The virtual lab can be used for the same thing. We're bringing back workloads at that target side. So if things are configured correctly, if you've got a accounting one machine and a replica job and you're also backing it up, you essentially could use the same virtual app to test that functionality. Here's an overview of Veeam Recovery Orchestrator ports, just to have kind of in your back pocket, know kind of, hey, what are we communicating with and what ports are we communicating with this over? So that's all I have for you. I'm going to actually pass it back to Tyson to go ahead and close us out.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. So just some takeaway resources here, as you see, and we'll provide some direct links to these, but like Jason said, we'll also provide these slides to you after. But Veeam University, so we have dedicated onboarding pathways for our products, and that includes Recovery Orchestrator. So if you want to kind of dive in a little more there, That's definitely free and available. Hands-on Labs is also a free resource. So we have different scenarios within the products, and you can spin these labs up. I think they're on a 3-hour timer, and there's some extension options, but you can run through them either as a scenario. There's like a pre-written scenario for it, or you can, just pull it up and kind of play around and poke around at the product without doing it in your environment. I'll mention this a little more on the next slide, but the Vero Heroes Den. So we have a large community here at Veeam. We have lots of customers around the globe. So there's a lot of custom content around VRO, Recovery Orchestrator, and so that the community site for that is part of this Vero Heroes Dens. And also that's where like the blog for the, as Jason mentioned, the RIP, the Linux RIP stuff is there. KBs, so definitely check out our knowledge base. That's going to be for all products, but you'll also be able to get and subscribe to security updates through that as well. But definitely that's great if you're using our products and you want to stay on top of things. Definitely check that out. User guide, as always, if you have if you're seeking deeper knowledge into actually how the product works or configuration, step through like the different wizards within the product. All of that is available through the user guide. And if you need any help along the way, you can definitely use our veeam.customersuccess.onboarding@veeam.com email. That will go to our onboarding team. Jason and I and the rest of the team will be able to follow up as needed. So to talk a little more, the VRO Heroes Den, like I said, this is where like different community blogs and posts will be about the Recovery Orchestrator product. As you can kind of see with what Jason was demoing, there's a lot of functionality that's within Recovery Orchestrator, and we're kind of running out of time in this call, just even trying to cover a high level of different scenarios and all that stuff. So if there's specific scenarios that you're looking for, like there was a great blog about clean room DR that Emily Tejas did, different scripts or custom functionality that people are using. A lot of that stuff will land in this site, this page. So definitely recommend if you're a fan of the product or you're working through different scenarios, check that site out. And then last but not least, as you're using the product, we're looking for kind of your feedback. And if you're a fan of what Recovery Orchestrator can do and you would like to maybe be featured by Veeam, we're looking for your story so that we can kind of highlight your experience. As it says on here, we can feature your customer story on our website and social channels. There's great opportunities. We generally highlight a couple different customer stories at every Veeam On, if that's something that you're interested in. And then it gives you kind of that opportunity, like we mentioned, the community pages and all that stuff, where we can really showcase, your expertise and experience with the product. So if you're interested, our advocacy group here at Veeam, you can use advocacy@veeam.com. They are more than happy to talk through this with you and get you set up towards sharing your success. And that kind of wraps it up for us. I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. And I hope that all your endeavors with Recovery Orchestrator are successful. As we mentioned, if you have any questions or anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. And I hope to bring you guys back for another webinar here soon. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.